Hey, Chris Myers here, Central Florida Sight Fishing Charters. Now that you've gotten your casting down, I'm going to talk about how to make your fly come to life when you're fishing in still water. So this could be a lake, it could be a pond, it could be some of the saltwater flats on inshore lagoons where we don't have tidal flow. If you don't do something when the fly hits the water, it's just going to sit there and either float if you have a floating fly or sink to the bottom. We have to make that fly come to life. And it's pretty simple, but I'm going to show you the technique that works for me and a couple of pointers. So when I let that fly go, I want to make sure that I'm not letting go with this hand, and I always have control of that line, and immediately I can stick it underneath my finger that I'm going to use to hold the line against the rod while I'm stripping. So all together, that looks like instantly it transitions as I'm dropping this rod down to underneath my finger. I want to keep the rod tip low to the water in case that I have to pick up and make another cast. So I don't want to stop and start stripping from up here, because now when I get a bite, I got a lot of play in the rod to overcome, and with saltwater fish especially, we're going to be setting the hook by pulling straight ahead. With a lot of your freshwater fish, you're going to be doing it by lifting the rod. If I already started with my rod up here, I don't have very far to lift, and I may not get the hook set. So I always want to start down at the water, and when I strip, I'm going to keep the line under just my index finger, and I'm pulling down with my left hand if you're a right-handed caster. So depending on what kind of fly I have, that determines the stripping motion I'm going to use. If I'm using a bait fish pattern, I might make that fish swim erratically. A couple strips, I might make them go in long, smooth strips. A lot of times in the salt water where I fish, I'm using stuff that imitates a crab, and the crab crawls very slowly along the bottom. So when I put that in front of a tailing redfish, you can see I'm only pulling 3 inches down at a time. If I put that right in front of a tailing fish and I pull it 2 big long strips, I just pulled it 4 feet away from him, and he's busy digging in the grass right there. He never saw my fly. So I want to put that fly in that fish's zone and make it do what a crab does, and that's crawl along the bottom down in the grass, and I want to make it so that fish can find it. So I'm only pulling 2-3 inches at a time for the crab and the shrimp flies. If I'm pulling a topwater fly, so I might pop it, one long pop, then pick up my slack, pop it, then a couple little short strips. So you can play around with how you want that fly to move, but you want to be using just your index finger. So when we set the hook, again, if I'm stripping in fresh water for trout fishing, if I get a bite, I might just be lifting that rod up, and I'm using a very small hook. It goes in very easily. Salt water, I want to keep the rod pointed down the line, and I want to pull straight back. So 2 different hook set techniques. But what I don't want to do is get in the habit of using the lure like we do with a spinning rod. We might twitch the tip of the rod to get the fly to move. We don't want to do that with our flies, because it gets my rod out of position. It gets my rod out of position for another quick cast. It gets my rod out of position for setting the hook. So when we're moving that fly, you can make it do all you want to do just by stripping downward with your hand. Get in the habit of getting that right under the finger instantly, and play around with different retrieves until you find the one that works with the particular fly that you're using.